Moonlight sheeted across the tribunal dais and turned the carved wolf head rail white as bone. Frost had crept into the joints of the stone overnight. Pale rime traced every chisel mark and made the old carvings look newly cut, as if the court had been made for this one hearing and this one reckoning. Leora stood on the lower step with her left glove tucked into her belt and a jagged red line crossing her palm where the cairn slate had split 2 nights earlier. The cut was mostly closed now, pink at the edges, tender when she flexed. She kept her hand open anyway. A brass brazier burned to her right. Each time wind pressed through the high shutters, sparks lifted and snapped like tiny teeth before vanishing in the draft. On the top step, Magistrate Elira Thorne held a folded charter and tapped its corner against her thigh. Once, twice, 3 times. A rhythm she used when she wanted everyone's nerves tuned to her. The sound was small compared to the hall, but in the hush before testimony it carried. Morrow planted himself at Leora's boot, one clouded eye fixed on Elira. One good eye fixed on the west doors where Sebastian had just entered, with rain darkening his shoulders and the ends of his hair. His staff clicked once against stone as he crossed to the center aisle. Vey stood 3 paces behind him with a leather ledger strapped shut by a green cord. Bran leaned against the eastern pillar, jaw tight enough that muscle jumped each time he swallowed. His hands were empty on purpose. He kept them empty with visible effort. "You ask this court for reinstatement under ritual parity," Elira said, voice slicing cleanly under the rafters. "Then speak your evidence and pray it survives your own tongue." Leora lifted the wax shard in her healing hand. "Not prayer. Proof." Before Elira could answer, Sebastian took the center tile and drove the butt of his staff against stone. The crack of wood on granite bounced through ribs and railings and benches, turning every head toward him. "She is not petitioning me," he said. "She is standing beside me." The first time he had spoken over her in this hall, it had burned. Tonight his interruption landed like an iron bar dropped in floodwater. Heavy, useful, undeniable. Leora did not look at him. She held the wax up where witnesses could see the mint notch and said, clear enough that no scribe would ask her to repeat, "The notch matches the private seal mint issued to your office. Vey will confirm from quartermaster ledgers. Morrow found 2 hidden caches on paired patrol nights 2 and 5, both on inward shifted lines. That is coordinated tampering across both sides. That is not trespass. That is fraud." Elira's mouth thinned. Bold. For a runner who once begged to be overlooked. Leora heard the old jeer and tasted iron from the place inside her cheek she had bitten raw before walking in. The words pulled her backward in one hard jerk, to another full moon, another order, another humiliation she had swallowed because breathing mattered more than pride that night. 3 moons earlier, harvest full moon, the same hall smelled of wet wool, cider mash, horse leather, and damp pine smoke dragged in from the courtyard braziers. Lanterns hung from iron hooks in 2 rows along the beams, their glass sides fogged from breath below and cold above. Chalk treaty maps still marked the floor from afternoon negotiation. The line labeled 47 acres crossed the center tiles in rough white strokes, then bent north where hands had argued over river access. By dusk, half that line had been smudged by boots. Leora entered through the east arch with Morrow limping at her side and mud dried to both knees. He had cut his pad on shale the previous week and healed with a slight hitch. But when the herald struck the floor with his rod, Morrow squared himself as if the limp had never existed. The herald called names in full title, each one like a weight being set on a scale. Sebastian Nightshade, Western Ridge Border Alpha. A beat. Leora Venn, Eastern Boundary Runner under provisional claim. Morrow growled at claim and leaned against her shin so hard his shoulder shook her balance. She had been walking the Eastern Circuit for 8 years by then. She started in 2018, after her father's body came home wrapped in sailcloth and tied at wrists and ankles with rope that had left marks under the skin. No one asked who would walk his route next. Men stood in the yard and discussed grain shipments. Women boiled cloth for washing the dead. Bran, 11 and furious at everything, kicked a fence post until 2 toes fractured and still tried to follow her at dusk. Leora waited until he slept and went out alone with Morrow, who was old enough to know commands and young enough to learn new ones fast. In those first months, she learned the boundary by pain and repetition. Fox tooth notch first, split capstone second, iron peg third, river stack fourth, ash marker fifth, then scree traverse before moonset. She learned each eastern cairn by touch because fog could erase sight and snow could erase shape. She learned where water undercut trail in spring and where black ice formed first in autumn. She learned how to breathe through fear when owls dropped from pines without warning and when distant voices sounded too close. She taught Morrow to nose each stone, wait for her hand signal, then move. He learned her whistles better than he learned any man's name. Across the harvest hall, Sebastian unbuckled his cloak and shook rain from it in one hard motion. She had watched him from distance for years, a dark cutout on western switchbacks. Always moving, always alone. In 2022, after his former claimant died in a raid at the Southern Cut, he resumed the West Full Moon Circuit with no partner and no escort. People called it pride. Leora called it punishment chosen on purpose. Magistrate Illyra stepped onto the dais with article tablets under one arm and said, "Convocation opens under Moon Court authority. Boundary dispute, 47 acres of contested strip between Western Ridge and Eastern Run. Petitioning penalty if trespass is sustained. 12% grain tithe, assessed annually for 3 years." A murmur rolled across both packs. 12% meant seed grain sold before spring thaw. It meant borrowing from families already stretched. It meant arguments over who got porridge and who got broth in late winter. Illyra unrolled a pale strip of vellum and read in clipped syllables. Article 9, Emergency Charter, where border breach creates immediate risk of armed incursion, an alpha may enforce coercive claiming of an unaligned runner to secure patrol continuity. She looked directly at Sebastian. If runner Leora refuses claim, and if you refuse enforcement, Western Ridge forfeits half supervisory rights over the disputed strip pending tribunal seizure. Leora felt Bran move behind her before she saw him. His hand came down on her shoulder with bruising force. "Say no," he hissed. "Say no, and we drag this rotten court into daylight where it can't hide." Sebastian answered before she could. "No need." He stepped onto the center tile, expression flat as quarried slate. "She is unfit for claim and unfit for paired authority. I decline." The word unfit hit harder than any blow because he aimed it cleanly where everyone could hear. A laugh from the back bench spiked and died. Someone whispered, not quietly enough. "So that's settled." Leora's ears rang. Illyra's eyes gleamed, satisfied and hungry. "Then we proceed to sanction." Sebastian lifted one hand, palm out. "Sanction after hearings. Paired patrol verification. 5 nights. If she trespasses, strip is hers to lose. If markers are wrong, we prove it under witness." Illyra's mouth tightened. The trap expected immediate claim or immediate penalty. Hearings meant delay. Delay meant records. Delay meant opportunity she didn't control. "Granted," she snapped. 5 paired patrol nights under court order. Any unsanctioned contact beyond route duty will be treated as influence. Leora stared at Sebastian and found no apology there, no explanation, only rigid control. He had saved her from forced claim by grinding her dignity into public stone. Strategy, maybe. Humiliation, certainly. Court dismissed into noise. She walked out with Morrow at her heel and did not look back. The first paired night began with sleet that came sideways and stung the skin under her eyes. Court escorts followed for the first mile, two silent guards with moon badges pinned at their throats and iron pikes wrapped in oilcloth to keep the metal dry, then stopped at Split Rock under order, as if the line itself might poison them if they crossed without writ. Leora and Sebastian continued alone. She kept to the eastern edge of the path, counting cadence in her head to avoid counting his footsteps. He kept to western edge, staff in his left hand, Mason's hammer looped at his belt. Morrow ranged between them in a steady zigzag, nose low, tail level, checking both scents like he understood the legal stakes and resented all of them. At the first marker she knelt, brushed frost from the capstone with her sleeve, and checked notch orientation. Foxtooth faces northeast. Correct. Sebastian crouched opposite and measured spacing between this cairn and the next, with cord marks burned in at 1-yard intervals. Distance from last pin down by 6 inches, he said. Could be washout. Could be. Noted anyway. She wrote with numb fingers in oilskin notebook. Night 1, marker 1, orientation true. Span drift 6 inches south. Her script went smaller as cold deepened. Sleet ticked against notebook cover like fingernails. At the second eastern cairn she counted under her breath. 1, 2, 3, 4 stacked faces should be north. This has 3 north, 1 east. Someone rotated it. Recently, Sebastian said from behind her shoulder. He scraped the stone with his thumbnail and held up green, damp shreds. Fresh-cut lichen. Under 6 weeks. She glanced up, anger still sharp enough to cut. You know lichen now? I laid retaining walls before rank. Stonemason training doesn't leave your hands. He did not sound proud. He sounded like someone reciting a fact that used to belong to another life. She logged date, marker position, lichen condition, and direction of rotation. When she stood, snow had started collecting along his lashes. She wanted to ask why he had chosen that word in Hall. Instead, she clicked her tongue to Morrow and moved on. They found 2 more minor shifts before moonset. 1 peg tilted inward by what could be freeze-thaw, 1 stack with mud packed at base as if recently reset. Nothing conclusive. Enough to keep hearing alive. At Split Rock on return, the guards checked route stamps and eyed the distance between Leora and Sebastian as if inches were evidence. Leora signed without comment. Sebastian signed beneath her name. Their ink bled in the damp and touched where the pen had dragged too slowly. Night 2 took River Shelf, where Cairn 4 should line with Black Pine stand on opposite bank. Sky stayed clear at dusk, then dropped fog by full dark. Water slapped the rocks hard enough to throw mist onto their faces and slick the path. Leora tasted river silt on her lips. Slow at the bend, she said to Morrow out of habit. Sebastian glanced at her, then at the dog. He still takes commands in 3 tones. Upward for move, flat for hold, clipped for alert. He learned when Bran still tripped over his own boots. Bran still trips over his temper. She almost smiled despite herself. That too. They reached the bend where trail narrowed beside undercut bank. Morrow stopped dead and barked once to the left, sharp and wrong. He had never broken route there in 8 years. Leora's hand went to his collar instinctively. Stay on line, she ordered. Morrow barked again, higher this time, then lunged into a tangle of exposed roots and dug with both front paws until mud sprayed her knees. He whined between barks, not panic, insistence. Sebastian crouched opposite him and levered his hammer under a flat slate half buried in root mass. It shifted with a sucking sound. Beneath sat a waxed pouch wrapped in oiled twine. They both went still for 1 breath. Leora cut twine with her belt knife. Inside, a lump of black seal wax, a packet of root slips stamped with Moon Court sigil, and a carved token marked for patrol transfer authorization. Sebastian swore softly. Cash. Leora touched the wax. Cool, smooth, deliberate. Not river debris? not chance. One cache can be planted by anyone. Agreed. Could still be a trap for us. Also agreed. She wrapped contents back in cloth, sealed with root knot, and logged exact location against Riverbend marker. Sebastian measured distance to nearest cairn and carved notch into his staff for quick reference. Morrow sat and watched them, chest heaving, mud caked to whiskers. She cupped his jaw with both hands. Good boy. Good stubborn old boy. He licked once at her sleeve and sneezed river water. On the return climb, Sebastian said, If Elira calls this contamination, she'll ask why we left line. Morrow forced deviation. I logged time and direction. She'll call the dog unreliable. He's more reliable than half her clerks. That time Sebastian did smile, brief and tired. True. Night 3 put them in old archive annex after patrol, because Elira demanded interim statements before dawn. The annex had no windows, only vent slits near ceiling, and shelves of clay tablets stacked in cedar frames. It smelled of old ash, wet leather, lamp oil, and mold stubborn enough to survive every winter fire. A brazier burned low in center, orange light breathing over maps and charters laid flat beneath stone paperweights. Leora stood on one side of table, Sebastian on the other. Both hands braced over a boundary map marked with charcoal circles and tiny numbers. Your fourth note says marker drift 8 inches, he said, 7.5. You wrote 8? Because your measuring cord frays at the 6th knot. I rounded up. That cord was calibrated last thaw, and left wet in saddlebags after. He looked up, ready to argue, and stopped. For a moment the quarrel thinned into something hotter and harder to manage, not tenderness, recognition. She could see the cut across his knuckle from lifting Riverstone, fresh because he had reopened it against hammer grip. He could see the bruise yellowing under her left collar from Bran's grip in Harvest Hall. Neither mentioned either mark. The brazier popped. One coal collapsed inward and sent sparks up through the grate. Leora broke eye contact first and pushed a tablet toward him. Sign if the wording matches. He read. Observed inward shifts at markers 2 and 4. No conclusion pending additional patrol nights. That keeps scope narrow. It keeps us alive through morning. Fair. He signed with a blunt pen stroke, then handed it back. Their fingers touched at the edge of the tablet. Brief. Unavoidable. I don't need your pity, she said, voice lower than she intended. Good, he answered. I don't have any. Then what do you have? His jaw tightened. A timetable and no margin for mistakes. She nodded once. It was not answer enough, but it was honest enough to file for later. When they stepped out, pre-dawn wind knifed down corridor and made both of them blink hard. Morrow, who had been sleeping by the archive door with his head on his paws, rose immediately and pressed against Leora's leg as if confirming she was still there. Night 4 brought rain so hard it flattened broom grass, hammered roof tiles, and ran down sleeves into elbows no matter how tight straps were cinched. They crossed the stair above rain court where moon water drained through carved channels to a central basin. The stone steps shone black-green with algae and old polish. Leora took the inner edge, boot finding each worn dip by memory. Sebastian followed half a pace behind, lantern shaded with his hand to keep flame from guttering. Wind drove sheets of water sideways through the open arches. At the 5th step from landing, her soul slid. She lost purchase, cursed, and pitched backward. Sebastian caught her wrist before her shoulder hit stone. His grip locked around her pulse, hot despite cold rain. She felt the callous ridge at the base of his thumb and the tremor he suppressed. He released her fast, like touching flame. Watch footing. Don't command me. Then call it request. She pulled her sleeve down where his fingers had pushed fabric back. Request acknowledged. At next landing she found marker peg tilted inward roughly 10 degrees, base freshly packed with pale clay not native to that side of stair. He found tool marks, parallel scratches from narrow pry implement. Same direction as earlier shifts, he said over rain noise. She wrote under the shelter of her body, charcoal smearing where drops hit page. Pattern holds. Their shoulders brushed once on the narrow turn. Both moved apart immediately. No witness shouted. Water did all the shouting, pounding stone until words arrived in fragments and then in bursts. Under the arch beside overflow basin, he spoke without preface, rain running off his jaw. I want you, not this chain. She stared through water. You called me unfit? I called you unclaimable to a predator and left her no legal emergency. She still caged us in 5 nights. And I'm using everyone. Basin overflowed and sent cold water around their boots. Leora clenched her fist until nails bit palm. Desire had never once rewritten law in her favor. Desire had gotten women cornered behind words men later called procedure. You say want like that protects anything? It doesn't. Evidence does. Witnesses do. Terms do. Then keep to terms. His mouth tightened. I am. They held that line the rest of night, close enough to hear each other breathe, far enough that neither could be accused of influence. By dawn, both were soaked through to skin, and Leora's notebook pages curled at edges despite oilskin wrap. Night 5 started clear, sharp as cut glass, and ended under frost. Trail climbed Upper Scree where moonlight made loose stone glitter like fish scales. Air smelled of juniper and old snow. Their breath plumed white. Morrow moved with unusual urgency from the first marker, pausing less, checking wind more. At the narrow pass between 2 boulders, he halted abruptly, ears forward, then barked 3 rapid bursts, and veered uphill against every route pattern she had drilled into him. He's offline again, Sebastian said. He doesn't break twice for nothing. They followed him over unstable scree to a dead juniper snag split by lightning years earlier. Beneath the root bowl, hidden under a slab wedged by hand, sat a second waxed pouch sealed with black pitch and wrapped in cord tied with clerk's knot. Leora's fingers were numb. She opened it anyway. Inside, forged slips matching the first set, duplicate route stamps, and a wax stick snapped in half. Sebastian held one wax half to moonlight. A tiny crescent nick cut the side near base. Leora felt her stomach drop and steady in the same breath. Private mint notch. If this is what I think, Vey can prove source from issue ledgers. Morrow nudged her calf and whined low, asking with his whole body whether he had done right. She crouched and pressed forehead to his. You did, old wolf. You did exactly right. They resealed both caches separately, marked with route knots and initials, and logged precise coordinates against cairnline. Sebastian insisted on duplicate notes in his own hand in case one book vanished before hearing. Leora agreed and watched him write by lantern with fingers stiff from cold. On descent, he said, at hearing she'll claim the notch could be copied. Then we need ledger entry for request, issue, and replacement. Vey keeps all 3 if anyone does. He does. When they reached the lower yard just before dawn, Bran waited on the threshold with an axe over one shoulder and sleepless rage in every line of him. Snow melt dripped from his hair onto collar. He looked like he had been standing there an hour. You found planted seals and you're still bringing it back to court? He snapped before they could speak. We burn Elira's carriage and end it. Leora stepped between him and Sebastian before either could move. Put the axe down. Bran's nostrils flared. She tried to collar you in front of everyone. And if you raid, she gets Article 9 emergency in blood instead of parchment. Leora shoved second pouch into his chest. He caught it by reflex. You want to protect me? Then testify what you saw and where. Time marks, route marks. No embellishment. I am not a clerk. You are my brother. You can count to 5 nights and tell truth. Sebastian added, quiet but hard. Raid once, and you hand her the war she's staging. Bran looked between them, hate and fear wrestling across his face. You sound like you planned this together. Leora answered first. We planned survival. That all? He held her gaze, then dropped axe to floorboards with a heavy clatter. I'll speak, but if either of you lies, we don't survive if we lie, she said. He turned away, both hands on his head, and kicked the door shut hard enough to rattle hinges and wake two children in the next room, who began crying until someone hushed them. Morrow went to Bran anyway, and leaned against his leg until the younger man's breathing slowed. Vay came at noon with a satchel and 2 ledgers wrapped in waxed cloth. He stamped snow off boots at the threshold, accepted tea he did not drink, and set books on Leora's table beside a chipped enamel mug. I don't like courts, he said while untying green cord with thick fingers scarred by crates and rope burns. Too many people pretending numbers are opinions, but this part is not opinion. First ledger opened to 3 seasons prior. Columns of wax allotments, mint tool issue IDs, clerk signatures, replacement orders. Beside Elira's office allotment sat notation in Vay's block hand. Private Crescent Nick requested. Requested by magistrate's clerk in 2024, he said. No other office authorized this notch. Here is receipt signature. Here is return log. He turned pages with careful pressure so damp corners would not tear. Second book tracks tool custody by day, missing from lockbox for 2 days before harvest convocation, then found, no incident report filed. That's irregular enough to stink. Leora traced entry without touching ink. Will you swear this in hall? Vay snorted. I'll swear my own handwriting in any hall with a roof. Sebastian stood by window, arms crossed, eyes on training yard where Bran drilled spear turns with violence sharp enough to frighten sparring partners. We need same dais, same witnesses. Elira used ritual censure under convocation. Reinstatement has to mirror it. Leora looked over. You knew that rule at harvest and still used me as shield. His jaw flexed. I used my rank as shield. You were target either way. Don't polish it. I'm not. Silence stretched, raw and busy. Fire cracked once in hearth. Morrow thumped tail against table leg, then lay down with muzzle on Leora's boot, and sighed so deeply his jowls fluttered. Vay cleared throat and stood. I'll lodge copies with neutral clerk in lower records before sunset. If originals vanish, we still have chain. Thank you, Leora said. Thank me after we survive hearing. He left with 1 ledger. 1 remained under her hand. Afternoon bled into dusk. Rumors outran daylight. By evening, 2 different runners had arrived with 2 different versions of what Elira would do. Immediate sanction, delayed docket, private closed hearing. Leora trusted none of it. When frost glazed the outer steps and lantern by her lintel burned to blue nub, Sebastian walked her to her door because escorts had been pulled, and shadows moved where they should not. Morrow padded between them, nails clicking on stone. At the threshold, Leora set hand on latch and did not open it. If you come in, she said, breath fogging between them, I become what they call me. His breath smoked in answer. If I come in, I lose the argument I need tomorrow. For me? For us, if you still want that word. She studied him in lantern light, looking for condescension and finding strain. He lifted 1 hand, hesitated inches from her cheek, then let it fall. His restraint looked like work, not performance. We wait, he said. We don't hide, she answered. No. He stepped back once, then again. Morrow watched him descend the stairs and gave a low huff before nudging the door with his shoulder until she opened it. Inside, Bran sat at her table with 3 pages of testimony in cramped handwriting and ink on his thumb. He looked up, saw only her and the dog, and relaxed half an inch. You were out long, he said. Long enough. He slid the pages over. Read. Tell me if I sound like an idiot. She read aloud each line. Return times, mud on boots, cash in hand before meal bell, axe dropped before first light. You sound angry, she said. I am angry. Keep it factual angry. He grunted. I can do that for one morning. Morrow climbed onto hearthrug, turned twice, and collapsed with an old dog groan. Bran scratched his ear absently while Leora corrected 2 times and one place name. It was the most domestic thing they had done together in months. 3 people and 1 dog bent over paper while Frost drew feathers on the window. The winter full moon hearing packed the hall so tight, people stood along walls 3 deep and spilled into side aisles. Same dais, same witness benches, same wolfhead rail, frost-feathered lower windows. Each exhale made a brief cloud in lantern light. Scribes set extra ink pots because they expected disorder. Elira entered in white fur trim and carried article tablets high, as if relics protected her from contradiction. She began with a sneer shaped as procedure. Runner petitions reversal based on alleged evidence gathered under my own order. Convenient. Leora stepped forward before Sebastian could speak. Palm seemed tugged as she flexed. She held wax shard steady anyway. Evidence gathered under your order is still evidence. Elira pointed thin finger. You walked out of sanctioned line for those fines. Morrow broke route and alerted, Leora said. Both times. I logged deviation points and reasons. First cache on patrol night 2 at River Shelf Rootbed. Second cache on patrol night 5 at Upper Scree Juniper Snag. Bran witnessed retrieval of second cache on Barrack's return. Your hot-blooded brother? Elira laughed once. Axe Boy as legal witness? Bran came to stand with hair tied back and both hands empty, sleeves rolled to show no hidden blade. He looked at his sister, then at Sebastian, then straight at Magistrate. I wanted revenge raid, he said, voice rough and loud enough to carry. My sister ordered stand down. I recorded return time on Barrack's water clock and route mud pattern on her boots. Night 5, second cache in my hands before dawn meal bell. Elira tried to interrupt. Bran raised his voice over hers for first time in his life before authority. I brought no raid. I brought truth. That cost me more. A murmur rose and broke along benches. Elira snapped. Emotion is not evidence. Bran answered, then keep emotion and read my times. Laughter, brief and bitter, flickered through the crowd before stewards banged staffs for order. Vey took stand next with ledger open to marked page and green cord looped around wrist like a reminder that records were burdens you carried. He read line entries aloud without flourish, then held up mint tool wrapped in cloth. Tiny crescent cut near tip flashed under torchlight. Private notch issued to magistrate's office only, he said. Here inventory signature. Here replacement request when tool went missing 2 days before harvest. Found again in office lockbox. No other office has this cut. Elira said, sharp. Forgery of ledger is trivial. Vey's expression did not move. Then accuse me to my face, and we compare ink aging under court lamp. We can also summon store clerks if you want more people in this room hearing your accusation. Silence stretched. Elira did not call clerks. Sebastian stepped up last. He laid Mason's hammer on rail as oath object and spoke to room, not to Elira. Marker tampering dates align within 6 weeks before harvest. Evidence. Fresh-cut lichen at Eastern Cairn 2, displaced pegs at Raincourt Stair, mirrored inward shifts from both west and east lines. Mirrored shifts require access to both routes and motive to manufacture breach. He turned then, finally, to Leora. At harvest, I called her unfit. I did it to deny coercive claim under Article 9 and keep emergency pretext from closing over her. It was tactical. It was cruel. I apologize before every witness who heard me. The words landed harder than shouting. Leora had armored herself for legal argument and procedural contempt. She had not armored for him setting down pride in public. He lowered to one knee on cold stone, head bowed for one breath before meeting her eyes. "I will not own you," he said. "I ask for chosen oath between equals, contingent on court reversal and your consent." Elira slammed tablet down. "Improper. Emotional manipulation. Remove him from stand." An elder from rear bench stood, voice cracked but clear from decades of ritual recitation. "Censure witnessed by this court can only be lifted in this court before same witnesses and same dais. Let testimony stand." Another elder repeated it, then another. Row by row the phrase rolled outward until even those inside aisles echoed, "Same court, same witnesses, same dais." Elira tried to resume Article 9 reading, but her voice caught when a bailiff stepped forward and removed tablets from her hands under steward order. Moon Court stewards conferred for 7 minutes by water clock, while frost melted from cloaks and dripped onto floor. No one sat. Even children in the rear stood on benches to see. Morrow remained planted between Leora and Sebastian, head high, ears pricked toward dais. Chief Steward returned, unrolled decision strip, and read, "Magistrate Elira Thorne is removed from office pending full inquiry into oath abuse and evidentiary fraud. Disputed 47 acres restored to Joint Patrol oversight under provisional parity. Grain tithe threat nullified." Breath rushed out of hall like one long bellows stroke. The steward turned to Leora. "State terms if you accept co-warden arrangement." She faced Sebastian, neither kneeling nor towering, level on same step. "No coercive language, no claimant wording, no transfer of person. Oath binds root duty, mutual defense, and shared authority over Eastern and Western full moon circuits. Either party may petition review at 1 year before this same court." Sebastian rose. "Accepted." "Add one line," she said. "If either of us uses rank to diminish the other in public, we answer for it in public." His mouth twitched, nearly a grim smile. "Accepted." Steward lifted both hands. "So witnessed." Morrow barked once, loud enough to startle 3 dignitaries and draw a strangled laugh from Bran that sounded like relief, wearing boots too small. Outside hall, winter sun flashed off packed snow and made everyone squint. People clustered in knots, retelling hearing before boots cooled, each version already bending toward teller's bias. Children slid on icy flagstones until mothers dragged them clear of carriage lanes. Bran met Leora halfway down steps, fists jammed into coat pockets, a new insignia cord looped through belt. He smelled of wool and adrenaline, and the mint tea he drank when trying not to punch walls. "Eastern Patrol Captain offered me lead on lower route," he said. "I took it before I could punch someone and ruin your day." She bumped shoulder against his. "You'll lead hot for a week, and then learn to lead smart." He looked toward Sebastian, who stood with Vey near hitching post, both men reading copied orders while pretending they weren't being watched. "You trust him now?" "I trust what he did when it hurt him." "That enough?" "For tonight." Bran swallowed, then hugged her abruptly, hard and brief, chin knocking her temple. "Don't let court turn you into furniture. Try and stop me if they try." He snorted. "I'm leaving at dusk, so yes. I will stop you from 50 miles away by yelling at moonlight." He crouched and scratched Morrow's neck where fur was thickest. "Guard her." Morrow licked his wrist once and sneezed, then leaned into him long enough to leave pale hair on his sleeve. Vey approached with ledgers tucked under one arm, green cord retied in square knot. "I'm taking these back to stores," he said. "Not for coda drama, for inventory sanity." Leora laughed for first time in weeks, sharp and surprised enough that it hurt a little in her chest. "Go guard your numbers. Always." He tipped chin at Sebastian. "Don't waste second chance you bullied into existence." Sebastian accepted rebuke with nod. "Noted." By twilight, Bran rode east with 6 runners behind him, spears upright like winter reeds, saddle straps creaking in the cold. He did not look back until Ridge turn, then he lifted hand once without stopping. Leora raised hers in answer until the line disappeared beyond firs. When she turned, Sebastian waited beside old boundary stone at yard edge, one hand resting on weathered top where generations had carved initials and dates and then sanded them out when politics changed. First circuit as co-warden starts at moonrise, he said. She stepped to stone and laid her palm opposite his. Chisel scars roughened surface under skin. Then we start where both sides can see. They set out with Morrow between them, not ahead, not behind. Path climbed through fir shadow towards Split Rock, where West Trail and East Trail touched for 3 strides before separating. Tonight they took those 3 strides together. At first, shared marker Leora knelt and checked alignment by fingertip, reading Fox Tooth Notch in dark by memory before Lantern confirmed it. Sebastian held light low so she could see without glare. North face true, she said. He took Lantern, checked western side for fresh cuts, then ran thumb over lichen seam. No disturbance since last pass. She marked ledger. He signed beside entry. Routine, precise, unremarkable to anyone who had never lost sleep over moved stone. Essential to both of them. At second marker they paused while Morrow nosed base, sneezed, and sat when no anomaly found. Leora rubbed his chest where old scar crossed fur. "You're going to make all our future patrols look easy," she told him. Sebastian answered dryly. "He already did. We were the difficult part." She glanced up. "True." Clouds thinned as moon climbed. From ridge, disputed strip looked smaller than rumor had made it. A dark ribbon maybe 2 fields wide, nothing worth blood and everything worth stewardship. Wind carried scent of cedar smoke from distant homes and the faint metallic tang of incoming frost. Near midnight they reached Raincourt Stair where he had caught her wrist. Water now ran thin under ice rims, making glassy notes in channels. She stopped on landing and faced him. "I meant what I said at my door," she told him. "I won't be possessed. Not by court, not by title, not by want." "And I meant what I said in rain," he answered. "I want you. I don't want ownership." She studied his face in moonlight, searching for old reflex of command and finding caution, desire, and humility carved by recent damage. Not perfect, real. "Then come to my threshold after root," she said. "Stand there and ask again." He gave one short nod. "I will." They finished circuit before dawn, boots crunching frost, shoulders brushing only when trail narrowed enough to force it. At her door he stopped exactly where he had stopped before. No reach, no presumption. Morrow sat between them, tail sweeping once across threshold stone. "Leora," he said, and formal address this time sounded like vow, not accusation. "Will you choose this with me?" She opened door and held it. Not surrender. Invitation. As equal. As co-warden. As woman who keeps her own name. He crossed only when she stepped back and nodded. Morrow pushed past both first, circled twice on hearthrug, and collapsed with an old dog groan that sounded suspiciously like approval. He stretched one paw toward the fire and immediately began snoring in uneven bursts. Inside, nothing had changed and everything had. Same kettle, same scarred table, same hooks by door holding 2 cloaks now, instead of 1. Leora set patrol ledger down, then leaned both hands on table edge until tremor left her wrists. Sebastian waited without touching her until she turned and chose to close the distance herself. Before sleep took them, she stood at window and watched first light touch Boundary Ridge. For 8 years she had walked one side alone, carrying duty like contraband. This morning 2 sets of prints crossed the same frozen path, and neither erased the other. By second light, there would be reports to file, patrol schedules to merge, and 100 small fights over grain, rope, and jurisdiction. Bran would be halfway to Lower Route, loud and relentless. Vey would be in stores pretending not to be pleased that ledgers had held. Mara would wake, demand breakfast, and then insist on inspecting both boots before allowing either of them to leave again. Leora rested her palm on the cooled window glass and let herself feel the weight of what had shifted. Not rescue, not surrender, not absolution. Terms witnessed, ground held, work ahead. Behind her, Sebastian stirred and sat up, hair unruly, expression wary until she looked back, and it eased. Morrow thumped his tail twice without opening his eyes. "Moon's down," Sebastian said quietly. "Boundaries still there?" she answered. He stood, crossed to her, and stopped within arm's reach. "Then we keep it." "Yes," she said. "Together, and in writing." He huffed a laugh. "Vey would approve." "Vey approves nothing. He tolerates good documentation." That drew a fuller laugh from him, brief and warm in the cold room. Morrow opened one eye at the sound, decided laughter was not an emergency, and went back to sleep. Outside, sun climbed over Furline and lit the ridge in pale gold. The path waited, as it always had, indifferent to titles and arguments. Leora watched light spread along stone and thought of Foxtooth Notch, Split Capstone, Iron Peg, River Stack, Ash Marker, and the 3 shared strides at Split Rock. Then she turned from window, reached for her kettle, and began the day.